Hey folks, I'm Lucy with Ballyhoo Creations, and I'm going to show you how to make one of these furry monster puppets. This video tutorial is made for the puppet material kits that I'm selling on Etsy, but you can follow along and watch how they're built and then use your own materials too. Once you see how easy this is, you might get bit by the puppet building bug. These kits are made the same as my YIB, Y-I-B puppet sewing pattern. Or, if you have an embroidery machine, you can use the YAB, Y-A-B, puppet design files. That robo-stitches most parts in the hoop of your embroidery machine. And then you can come back and watch this video for customizing your little puppet friend. I'll link to my Etsy shop down in the description box where you can find all of these patterns and designs. The puppet material kits are a limited edition, but if you're lucky, you might find some of those still in my Etsy shop, especially during the holiday season. This video tutorial is divided into chapters or sections. You can see those at the bottom of the video. When you move backwards or forwards, those will show up, so you can easily navigate to the parts you need. I like to speed up the video on the boring parts like cutting or hand sewing, but if you want to slow things down or speed them up, you'll also find speed controls at the bottom of the screen. When I speed things up, you'll see it up in the upper corner up there. If you're using an embroidery machine to make your puppet, follow the instructions in your design download for the stitching part, and then come back here for the embellishing of your furry puppet. You can either make applique eyes or sew them on later. It's your choice. This video will show a fleece puppet in the beginning because the stitches and marks on fur are hard to see in video, but they show up better on fleece. Where working with fur is different than fleece, I'll switch to the fur sample of the puppet instead, like when I'm hand sewing the mouth or the eyes. And of course, if you run into any issues, you can contact me through my website at ballyhoocreations.com for assistance. I also have a Facebook group called Ballyhoo Inspiration and Support, where you can join and get help or just show off what you've made. We would love to see it. That's enough of me blabbering. Let's start making a puppet. Use the tearaway stabilizer that came with your kit to trace the pattern pieces for the head and body part, as well as for the fabric mouth, the brain pillow, and the two arms. Don't use a Sharpie like I'm using here. I'm using that so it will show up clearly in the video, but the ink from permanent markers can seep onto your fabric and stain them, so use a fabric-safe marker for this step. You can find those at the sewing stores, or you can use a pencil or a washable marker like a Crayola washable marker. Those work too. Be sure to transfer all the pattern markings to your stabilizer, like the arrows and the stop points. You can put both arms on one piece of stabilizer. I feel like that makes the sewing easier. And when you're done, you should have 4 pattern pieces traced onto the stabilizer. Lay each pattern on top of your fabric pieces, which should be stacked with right sides together, and then pin all 3 layers to create these fabric sandwiches. Now we're ready to stitch. Your instructions document has tips on sewing, such as the stitch length setting for each piece, so refer to that. That can make the sewing much easier if you follow those settings. And then you just sew directly on the lines you traced. Don't worry if it's not perfectly on the line. The stabilizer will help make the sewing easier. And when you're stitching the hands, just go slowly and let the machine do all the pulling while your hands just steer the fabric. And the super thick fur might be a tight fit under your presser foot. Just try to get it under there and sew very slowly on thick fur. It can be done, but it takes more patience, which is one reason I consider fur sewing to be an intermediate project. And here's what they'll look like after everything is stitched. I'll give you a close-up look on some of these. You can see I didn't follow the fingers exactly, but on the finished puppet hand, that's going to be perfectly fine. On the fabric mouth, you just make a circle and there's no opening there. The brain does have an opening in the back. There's the back side of it. And for the puppet head and body, you can see that I stopped sewing right there at the fold line. I'll show you the back of that in a minute. I also went and extended mine about 1 inch at the bottom just to make it longer. You could go even longer than that. And you can see how it's open there around the mouth. Now you can cut out each piece. Your instructions have suggestions for how much seam allowance to leave for each piece. And fleece doesn't unravel, so we've got a safety net there. When you're cutting around the fingers, you want to cut close to the stitches, but don't cut into your seams. Cut as close to the seam between each finger as you can. Using small scissors might be easier for this, and sharp scissors work much better than dull ones. Cut out the wedge for your mouth using the line you traced from your pattern. Do not cut the fold right there at the top. That's very important. Leave that fold intact. On your fur, don't worry about cutting the front and back seams just straight across like this. We're going to fix those a little bit later. But on the mouth, be careful and only cut one layer of fabric at a time, just cutting the backing on that mouth area. Once your pieces are cut out, you can gently tear away the stabilizer from your seams. It should pull away cleanly. Remove the stabilizer. This takes a bit of patience, but it's okay if some bits of that stabilizer are left behind. It's going to be inside, you'll never see it. To turn the fingers, I suggest using either hemostats or the easy point and turner tool. Both will work for these small fingers. You can try using a chopstick if you're skilled with that, but these tools are my favorites for turning small parts. I don't think I could do this with a chopstick. Fleece can be slippery, so if you moisten your hand a little bit, that will give you a better grip so that you can turn these more easily. The brain pillow is simple. Just remove the stabilizer and turn it right side out. And for the mouth, you should have 2 marks on the sides, and you want to cut one layer of fabric. Just pull them apart and cut one layer all the way across between those marks. That opens it up so you can turn that mouth right side out. If you lined up the fur direction with your pattern arrow, your front seam should look fine. You can't even see it, but the back seam will have a lot of fur trapped in the stitches. You can cut a scrap of your fur and make it from the top of the head all the way down to the bottom of the puppet, and you want the fur to be pointing down as much as possible when you do this. Cut it about 2 inches wide, and then go ahead and turn in about 1/4 inch on all of the edges of the strip and either glue or sew those down, and then you can attach that fur strip to the back of your puppet. Let me show you how that's going to be. It would go down the center like that, and it will cover up that seam. It will also, let me show you on this purple one, it will give you an extra fluff on the top of the head. This is the extra strip of fabric that I glued right here. You can kind of see where that is. There's a little bit of, it's hard to see. That's the whole point, is you want to cover that up. But you can see there how there's the strip that's glued on top of that seam where all the fur was trapped. So that's all that we need to do to cover up that unsightly back seam. Just try to get the fur pointing down as much as you can. It's probably going to go to one side or the other, but that's okay. We're not too worried about that. You want that strip to be about 13 inches long and about 2 inches wide, but you can play around with those dimensions. This method of putting the fur strip over the back of the puppet is much faster and easier than trying to pick out all that long fur out of the seam or stitch with all that thick fur shoved inside the seam allowance. Plus, this method stabilizes the puppet's back and can give you an extra poof of hair at the top. So I prefer this method of hiding that ugly back seam rather than trying to get all the fur out of the way when you're stitching. We have our mouth parts here with the fabric mouth, the rubber mouth plate, and the tongue. You cut the rubber circle in half and join them back together with a 1/4 inch space between them. You can either use waterproof medical tape or glue a scrap of fabric to both sides, both halves, to act like a hinge. I'm showing both of these methods, one on each side, but you only have to do one. Pick either the tape or the gluing the fabric, whichever you prefer. and then we glue the rubber side of that flappy mouth plate to the uncut side of the fabric mouth. It's harder to explain but makes sense when you actually watch it. I'm using fabric hot glue for this, but you could also use Fabri-Tac brand glue. I'm applying my glue to the wrong side of the fabric where you can see the seams, and then glue that rubber down, and then I flip the half circle over so that it's now right side out, the way it should be. Glue the tongue in place if you want one, and now we have our mouth plate. Use pins or clips to dry fit the mouth plate into the puppet's mouth opening, lining up the sides and the centers. Start your seam on the side, on the inside corner of the head. Pass your needle and thread through the loop at the end to secure your knot, and then begin the ladder stitch. I've got about 18 inches of thread, and it's doubled and knotted. That will get you through half of the mouth. If you need a seam gauge, you can use a marker with your ruler and put little marks on your thumb or your thumbnail to make sure that you're getting the right stitch length. I'm doing about 1/4 inch here. You just take 1/8 to 1/4 inch stitch each time, one on the black mouth, then on the puppet's lip area. Each time you want the thread to go straight across from one side to the other so it would look like railroad tracks, until you pull the thread tight and then it's invisible. You can roll the edges to the inside or use your needle to push them so that the seam is invisible. When you get to the opposite corner from where you started, tie a surface knot. You just take a small stitch in a hidden area, but don't pull the thread taut yet. Instead, pass your needle through the first loop, and you see that created a second loop? Now pass your needle through the second loop. And then when you carefully tighten that thread, the knot will sink down to the surface where you can easily hide it. I like to bury the thread inside. Now that the puppet mouth is sewn into the puppet's head, you can decide where you want to place the eyes. You might want to trim the fur around the face to change the character of your puppet and make it easier to stitch the eyes on. This is completely up to you. You can always come back later and trim it more neatly or take off more fur, but don't take off too much because you can't put it back on. Play around with the eye position and decide where you want them. The placement of the eyes has a huge effect on how the finished puppet will look. So try different positions and put the pupils on if that helps you get a feel for the character. The pupil stickers are temporary and you can change them later. When you decide where to put your eyes, you can attach them to the head temporarily with a single stitch around the back of the eye. That will hold them in place while you sew them down. We're going to use the ladder stitch again to sew all the way around the eye and attach it to the fur. You can stitch at the base of the eye or further up to kind of bury them into the fur a bit more. Use the white thread in your kit and pull it tightly so the eye will be firmly sewn to the head. It's easier if you remove the pupils so you don't catch the thread. People like to tug on puppet eyes and noses. It's just a thing, so it is important that they are secure. After you've ladder stitched once or even twice around the eye, you can do that surface knot again and bury the thread tail. Do that for both eyes and keep checking to be sure the eyes are even and are still where you want them to be. Don't let them migrate on you. But nobody's face is perfectly symmetrical, and some of the most charming puppets have wonky eyes. Cookie Monster is a good example, so don't obsess over symmetry. Next, we'll add the nose and attach the pupils. Okay, I want to mention a couple of things before we move on to the nose. There's a couple of different options you could use for the nose. I'm going to show you a very easy one. And also for the eyelids, if your kit came with the button eyes like this instead of the globe-shaped eyes, they're sewn on the same way. You would just ladder stitch right around this edge here, as close to the edge as you can. And they're just flatter. The eyelid pattern is for the button eyes. It fits those, and the way that you would do that is fold that in half. I like the not furry side, and you want to fold it so that it's not quite a little less than half that way, and then put it over your eye, and you can wrap the fabric around to the back and glue it in place. And then you would go ahead and stitch your eye onto your puppet that way, so you could have an eyelid. The eyelid pattern here does not fit this particular globe eye, but you could cut it a little bit larger, or actually if you wanted to, if your fleece is stretchy, you could get it and just glue it over the top and kind of tuck it under back there in the back. So you could go ahead and do it that way as well. That works nicely, actually. I like that. So that's about the eyelid and the button eyes. That some kits have the button eyes, and then you might also have the globe-shaped eyes. For the nose, I'm going to go ahead and use the fabric nose, and I've actually cut my nose a little bit smaller than the pattern because I put these eyes a little close together and I want to have a smaller nose. But you have a lot of options. Actually, this is a makeup sponge, and I find these at Dollar Tree, at the dollar store. And this is a smaller one. I've got a couple of different, it just depends on what they have in stock. But those make really great noses too. So I just wanted to point that out. One day I'm going to use that. I love that teal with the purple. But you could use something more like plush, like that. Of course, I'm not going to attach it yet. Stretch fabric is also really great for noses. You could do something like that. The one in your pattern would make one about that size. But we're using stretchy fabric, so you can make it a little bit bigger or smaller depending on how much stuffing you put in. The way that the nose is done, it's pretty simple. We're just going to do a running stitch all the way around the circle, and it could be big stitches. You can do several stitches at a time on the needle before you pull it. I've gone all the way around. I'm going to put a little bit of stuffing in there. Maybe more than a little. I'm going to pack it. And then when you pull on that string or thread, it will pull it closed like a little basket. And you want to pull it all the way until it is closed like that. And you can't see the stuffing anymore. And then just take a few stitches to hold that closed. Be careful of your fingers. Once you got it closed off, go ahead and put a knot in your thread so that if your thread ever breaks, your nose won't also come undone. But this is strong thread that's in your kit, so you should not have thread breaks. And then you can just sew it onto the face. And I like to do the ladder stitch, but you could just do a temporary stitch to put it where you want it. Now we're ready to go ahead and glue those pupils. Those pupils can be glued in place permanently because the adhesive on here is just temporary. It's not going to hold them long term. And I can tell that they're not quite straight yet. Just kind of eyeball it for a while, stare at it from different angles until you see that the pupils are where you want them and they're straight. Or not. You could do something funky with them too. And once you have them where you want them, I find I'm going to use hot glue for this, and I'm just going to lift up half of it, Put a little bit of glue into there. Not too much because you don't want it to ooze out. So get half of it done. And then this way, because the hot glue that I'm using is a fabric hot glue, or you could be using the Fabrifix glue. Those are machine washable glues, so these will be on there permanently and you can wash them. Be very careful when you're gluing. You don't want to make a mess because that glue will not come off. So less is more. And I will show you a cheat if you do happen to get glue on the pupils and it's showing. You could always use a Sharpie marker to cover that back up and make them black again. I see I got a little tiny bit, just a tiny bit on the edge right there. So that hides many sins. Let's get started with the arms. I've got the 2 foam noodles, and for one of these arms I don't need the foam noodle. I'm going to just push up on that noodle and you can see how there's a little tab. And just take that off of the wire and pull the wire out. And it might scrape up the inside, but that's fine. And then we want to cut that in half. This is going to be for the arm that has an arm rod. And just put those 2 halves up inside of the arm. And the reason that we do this is you want to push that all the way up to the top, and that leaves a little break there in the elbow area so that when you use the arm rod, the whole arm won't flop around, but it'll bend at the elbow like a regular arm. And then for the little hand attachment that the rod goes into, you want to make sure that the opening here, one side's closed, one is open, and you want that to be positioned right here towards the front of the hand opening. And if you see this little attachment, it has little holes on it, so you can sew it in or you can use glue. I'm going to put a little glue in there. You can test that out with your arm rod and just put it in there. Make sure that it fits in real nice and tight, and then you can flop the arm around. So we've got that one done, and for the other arm, you can do the same thing on the other arm, and you can put arm rods in both of the arms, or I'm going to use this noodle and leave the wire in and just put it up in there. And you can go ahead and attach your hand piece here if you want to, or you don't have to for the second arm. It's all up to you. Your kit does have 2 arms, and the reason I did that is this one can just sit here on the puppet when I'm working one arm with a single arm rod, then the other one can just kind of hang around in front of him like he's relaxed. And to attach the arms, just use a needle and thread. You want to attach the arms right at the chin area here, and it's kind of hard to see with all his fur, but right here's the bottom of his chin, so we want the arm to be right there on both sides. Your pattern does have markings, but on the fur it's really hard to get those transferred and see them, so it's very easy to just figure out where you want it. I've got my hand up inside there spread out like this to flatten this out, and I want his arm to be right over here. So I'm going to part that fur and then take a few stitches. There's not really a right or wrong way to attach the arm, but I do like to go through that foam noodle that's inside to keep it from shifting downwards. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that your thumbs are pointing upwards, like towards the head. Because if the thumbs are down, that's wrong. Hands don't work that way. So make sure the thumbs are pointing up when you put the arms on both sides. I'm going to bury the thread in the arm so there's no thread tail. That's one arm. And try to get the other one at the same level. Now the only thing left is to close up the openings in the arms. If you want to stuff the hands, you can put a little bit of fiber fill in there or a fabric scrap to kind of fill that out. The fingers are fat enough with just the fleece that you probably don't need to stuff them, although if you wanted to put wire in there and make them posable, you could. That's not included in the kit, and I'm not going to cover it here, but that is an option. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew these up, but I think this one that doesn't have the hand rod assembly might need a little stuffing. And again, your fleece scraps can do this too, just to fill it out a little bit. And now we just need to sew it up with a ladder stitch, and I'm going to show you that. I'll fast forward through it, but I'll do it on this arm here because we don't want to close where the arm rod's going to go in this little tube here. So we want to make sure we leave that open. So I'm going to start right here close to it and start my stitch. And this ladder stitch should be invisible once you're done. It pulls all the edges nicely together. The fingers will grab the thread. Nothing much you can do about it. Just be patient and keep getting it out of the way. If you're seeing stitches, you can use your needle to push down on the seam there and then pull your threads tight. It'll help them disappear. I'm just going to tie a knot, and then I'll bury my thread in the arm so that you won't see the thread tail.
When you wear your puppet, try to get your fingers into the mouth pocket for a more comfortable fit, and attach the arm rods to make hand gestures. Now it's time to play around and see what kind of personality comes out of your puppet. These little guys are so charming and fun to experiment with. If you're new to puppetry, check out YouTube for tons of videos that teach how to lip sync or move a hand and rod puppet like this one. I hope you found this video tutorial helpful for assembling your puppet kit from Ballyhoo Creations. I only make a few puppet kits each year, and a lot of love and care goes into each one. If you have any questions or issues while making your puppet, you can contact me through my website at ballyhoocreations.com, and I'll be happy to help. Happy stitching!